Here I am at Beaver Creek looking at my future house. This is the trailer. It is 20 feet by 8.6 feet. And somehow, some way, this is going to become a house. We've got some tools. We've got a bunch of wood. Some windows. Over here we've got a campsite that I have been setting up for the last couple of hours. When I got here, there was just ferns and blackberries and stuff on the ground, and I pulled it all out and piled some dirt up to make the ground a little bit flatter from that big pile over there. Then I set up a kitchen. The propane stove was leaking, so I fixed it by moving a gasket around, and I had some problems with the screws and stripped them. And in the process of fixing that, I pinched my hand in some pliers. So, first injury of the day. I also have a blister, not sure where I got that. And looking forward to getting started tomorrow. It's pretty exciting. Don't know what'll happen. So this morning we built part of the subfloor. Each one of these 2x4s on the side that's closest to me is 10 feet long, and then on the other side they're 8 feet 7 inches and 7 3/4 inches. And they're different because the interior space of the trailer, like from inside this lip to the other inside of the lip on the other side, is not an exact amount. The trailer overall is 20 feet long, so you have to kind of divide it up in a wonky way. That horizontal joist across the center is almost centered over an axle, and none of this is really load bearing. What's load bearing is what's underneath the trailer. To secure the 2x4s to the carriage, we have these bolt holes, and you have to drill through here. So I used a big bit earlier to go through the metal, which already had a hole in it, and then through the 2x4 on the other side. So you can see there's a big hole. And then what we do is we take a 5-inch carriage bolt and we put it in this hole. You need a hammer. And then you hammer it in, and it's square, and so it sinks into the wood and it stays and it won't turn. And then you put a washer and a nut on the other side, so you can actually tighten the nut without having to get into and underneath the floor, which is kind of hard. And on this side, we've got all of the insulation, which is rock wool. Rock wool has some really good properties for a tiny house, in that it's pretty mold resistant. It's a byproduct of rocks, and it's easier to work with than fiberglass. It's not as dangerous. You don't have to wear a mask when you're outside like this. We will still wear gloves, however. And it's also more fire resistant than other kinds of insulation. So that's what we got. Super long day today, even though it doesn't look like much got done. We started out by leveling the trailer. That's what these Lincoln log looking structures are for. And we used a water tube to level the trailer on top of the fancy leveling gadget thing that you would expect to use. So that was kind of cool because it was a lot like the surveying that I've done previously. We built some sections of the wall. We didn't finish them. Here's a section. Here's a section. Here's a section. And then up there is yet another section. So we use, I no longer remember. We used some kind of saw to cut all of this wood. And then we marked out on the bottom where each vertical joist would go, so you can't see it, but underneath where this is now, there's like a marking, an X and a couple of lines. And then we went through and we nailed all of the joists to the base board, and went all the way across. And it's really, it seems simple and straightforward, but it's kind of tricky because you have to get the right vertical joist in the right place on the horizontal baseboard all the way down the wall. So you have to know what order it's in, and you have to know how far apart these are going to be from each other. This one, and sort of down the line. And you also have to keep in mind on places where you're going to have a big window or something like that, that you need to have extra framing to distribute the load of the roof. So this is where a door is going to go, in this gap eventually. And above the door we have this big 4x4 because the roof is going to go at the end, of course, and it's going to put a lot of weight on those studs, and there's a bigger gap there than the 24 inches. So we need to be able to span that gap and not have anything fall down or break or get warped or whatever. And then one of the tricky and kind of particular things about working on a tiny house is that you have these wheel wells to cut around. And so on this wall, we didn't have to do it on the other wall, but on this wall we added these little pieces of scrap wood on both sides, because eventually this wall will stand up and then this wheel well will be framed out, and I assume that something will go on this piece, or maybe we're just going to cut sheathing. I'm not entirely sure yet. It rained off and on all day. It was kind of exhausting and a little bit miserable, and sometimes it was so much rain that we hid under the awning over there for a while and waited. I'm hoping for better weather tomorrow, but it's a 50-50 chance of whether it'll rain or not. There's a hole in my brand new tent, so I've covered the top with a big trash bag. I didn't have enough warm clothes. I wasn't thinking about Pacific Northwest rain for a week, so I had to drive to Fred Meyer's today to buy a jacket and a vest, which I'm now wearing. But overall, pretty good day, and we're in good shape to finish out the end walls tomorrow and to get all these walls up and nailed into each other, and at that point it'll start really looking like a house. So pretty exciting. I'm pretty sore. I'll see y'all tomorrow. What's up, y'all? So today we took those walls that we made yesterday and we put them up. Here they are. It took 2.5 people, me being the half person, to get them up. There's the door. Across there is a nice big 4-foot window. Over here we've got 2 more wall bits going up, and they're all braced. Those bracings are temporary. They are nailed into the floor and nailed up at the top to keep this from falling over while the end walls aren't up. On the bottom we did liquid nails underneath the baseboard, which really doesn't do anything. This is the bottom edge of the trailer here, except for if the wall ever falls down, you can see some of that liquid nails. It'll just rip the paint off, but it did help us as we were putting them up to keep them from sliding off the metal plate. And then we put more carriage bolts in. There were already holes pre-drilled into the trailer, so there's a carriage bolt, and then underneath the nut and the washer, just like for the flooring. And we also have part of the framing around the wheel well going up over there, and we will have kind of a different setup on this side because there's a window at the top of this wall. You can see a little bit cut out, so that kind of changes how this one is framed on this side. And that's it. Afternoon, everybody. So I wanted to show you the inside of a house from on a ladder. Here's a ladder. We have completed the wall sheathing all the way around, every which way. What remains is the roof sheathing, big gaps, and cutting out the pieces that are sticking up into the windows. There's a window, it's fully plywooded over. And the way to do that is to drill holes into the corners and then to cut out the pieces with a skill saw, which is not something I'll be doing because the risk of cutting into the frame is quite high. Ben has spent the morning putting the last little bits of sheathing on, and I have spent the morning adding, God, I can no longer remember what these are called, but these pieces in between each of the rafters all the way up and down so that the sheathing has something to rest on and get nailed into. And it's been a lot of time on a ladder. The thing with the sheathing is that you need to overlap every joist, every vertical joist, like halfway when you have a seam with the plywood. I can show you on the outside. Let me get down the ladder first. So like, where's a good example? Here. So on the edge, this piece of plywood is overlapping the corner joist, like enough to get into the frame of the house. And then we're going to need to put another piece of plywood here. And that's the case everywhere. We did a pretty good job cutting and matching things. The only place that's like really obviously wonky is right there, where this corner piece of plywood was just a little bit higher than that piece of plywood, and so the top piece of plywood we had to cut an inch out across to get it to fit like Tetris style. But looking good, making really good progress. I'm excited for the next step, which will be to sheath the roof and then cut the windows out and then some other stuff. Morning, everybody. So we have all the sheathing on, we have all the windows cut out, and the door. The door is also cut out. We have a roof. Look at that roof. So the thing about the roof is that it's got these sheathing clips in between each big plywood panel, and that's to keep 1/8 of an inch gap in between each, and we want to do that to allow the wood to expand and contract with temperature and ambient moisture levels. I'll show you the trim. Well, not trim, but the extra pieces we had to do on the corners. So the way the plywood fits around, like this piece is an 8-foot long piece, but it doesn't go totally to the ends, so you have to cut out these other pieces and fit them into the corners. Did that everywhere. Oh no, I missed one. I missed a spot. Shit. That's why we're doing this camera thing, so that I can make my mistakes on camera. I got to use a table saw to cut those little pieces, which was pretty cool. So, last day, at least this week, we wrapped most of the house in Hydro Gap. Hydro Gap is better than Tyvek. Tyvek rips easily. Hydro Gap has these additional little dotty things so that when siding gets applied, water can run out from beneath the siding. It doesn't get stuck between the siding and the house and grow mold. Before we put the house wrap up, we ran out of house wrap at the end, incidentally, by the way. So we'll finish next week. But before we put the house wrap up, we finished cutting out all the windows, and we put up Z flashing on the bottom. So beneath this a bead of caulk, and then you cut this to fit the corners. So you cut a flat piece at a 45-degree angle on both sides, and then you cut the bottom little strip so that it kind of bends around the corner of the house. You do the same thing on the wheel wells. I'm not sure if I can show you because they're covered. No, probably not. But you have to go up. Yeah, here you go. Up vertically against the wheel well, so you don't cut the same place. You keep that middle strip intact, and then you cut the top strip here, and then it folds up and it goes all the way up and around the wheel well and down. And so what this does is when water, if there's any water that gets behind the house wrap, if it hits this, it will drip like over and down, and it won't go back up and get underneath the plywood, because water apparently doesn't obey the laws of gravity very well. Yeah, and then we did the house wrap, and the key to the house wrap is to make it as flat and straight as possible. We used a staple gun to tack it down. No, we used a staple hammer to tack it down. We used a pneumatic staple gun on the Z-flashing. It was fairly difficult to do these big wraps. They're like 5 feet tall, and they're pretty heavy when you start. There are some wrinkles. It's hard to get it all straight. Siding goes over top of this, and then we're getting closer and closer to being done. So, pretty exciting.